There comes a moment in every life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence around us, but the one within. That vast, echoing hollowness that grows louder in the middle of the night. When the distractions have dimmed, when no one is watching, when the masks slip, I remember such a silence. Not in the bunk of the barracks, not even on the death marches, but in myself. A silence so heavy it pressed against my chest like a weight I could not lift. And yet, it was in that silence that I began to hear something else. Not words, not thoughts, but a calling. Something deep and urgent, beyond the language of the mind, beyond the stories I had told myself. It asked me, not if I could survive, but who I would become through the surviving. You see, suffering is not the end. It is a crucible, a passage, a confrontation. It strips away the superficial not to destroy us, but to expose what is real, and what is real must be faced. Many people think transformation is loud, that it comes with thunder, visions, revelations. But the greatest transformation I've known did not roar. It came like a whisper, like a breath after drowning, like a single light flickering on in a room I thought abandoned. And in that light I began to see myself not as a victim of life, but as a participant in something larger than suffering. I was being asked, not by God, not by fate, not even by logics, but by life itself. What will you do with what you've been given, even if all you've been given is pain? And that is the question I now ask you. Because you, too, have suffered. Perhaps not in camps, but in your own internal exiles. You have known betrayal, loneliness, the loss of meaning. You have watched as the things you built crumbled, as the people you loved left or changed or disappeared. You have stood at the edge of your own despair and wondered, is this all? I know. But I also know this. The moment you stop running from the pain and turn to face it with open eyes and a steady soul, something remarkable begins. Pain loses its power to diminish you, because it has become your teacher. And it teaches this: life is not primarily about pleasure, as hedonists say, nor is it merely about power, as some claim. Life is about meaning, and meaning is not given. It is created, revealed, chosen. That is the great paradox. You do not find meaning by seeking it directly. You find it by answering the call of life, even when life calls you through tears. Especially then. In the camps, I saw men who had nothing left choose to give their last crust of bread to someone weaker. That was meaning. I saw men look at the sunrise behind the barbed wire and whisper prayers with cracked lips. That was meaning. I saw men who knew they would not survive still take care of others who might. That was meaning. None of those moments changed their fate, but they transformed their experience. And in doing so, they revealed a truth we all forget. You are not free from suffering, but you are always free to choose your stance within it. This is not a comforting idea. It is a demanding one, because it leaves no more room for excuses. It invites you to ask, what am I doing with the pain I have? Am I hiding from it, blaming others, letting it rot inside me? Or am I daring to transform it, to see it not as a curse, but a commission? Not as punishment, but as purpose. Because every wound can either become a wall or a window, and you must choose. No one can do it for you. Your parents cannot give you your meaning. Your lover cannot make it for you. Your achievements, your followers, your wealth, none of it will last. Only your response will. I often ask my patients a strange question. Why haven't you taken your life? It's not cruel. It's clarifying, because the answer reveals what still holds value, what still matters, what still breathes under the ashes. Maybe it's your child. Maybe it's a piece of music. Maybe it's a tree you pass every morning that reminds you the world can still be beautiful. Whatever it is yours. Hold on to it, because from that thread, meaning can grow, even from rubble, even from trauma, even from the moment when you believed it was all over. In fact, especially then. That is the paradox of healing. It does not begin when you are strong. It begins when you are broken, but willing. And if you are willing, then hear this now. Your life still has meaning. Your suffering still contains a message. And your future still waits to be lived. If you dare to choose it, not to erase the past, Not to pretend it didn't happen, but to ask it, "What now?" And to listen, truly listen, because life does not stop speaking to you just because you are hurting. In fact, pain often amplifies its voice, and meaning, it does not hide from you. It waits, patiently, lovingly, like a friend in the dark, like a sunrise behind your closed eyes. And when you are ready to open them, not with certainty but with courage, you will see it, even if faintly, even if trembling, it will be there, waiting to become the next chapter of your life. You are not done. This is not the end. This is the middle. The hardest part, yes, but also the place where you finally stop pretending and start becoming. I have said that pain asks a question, but there is more. Pain doesn't only ask, it invites. It invites you to stop living on the surface, to stop clinging to roles you never chose, masks you've worn too long. It invites you to descend, not into despair, but into depth, because somewhere beneath your suffering lies something more true than your fear. Let me tell you something many will not. You will break. You already have. The person you were before the loss, before the trauma, before the disillusionment. That person cannot come back. But this is not tragedy. It is initiation. It is the burning away of what was never essential. And what is essential? That is for you to answer, and only you. In the camp, I remember a man, I will call him Otto, who had been a musician before the war. They had taken his violin, his freedom, his name. But in the evenings, after the guards were gone and the sky had gone black, Otto would hum, quietly, carefully. Just fragments of melody, almost like prayer. He did not hum to entertain. He hummed to survive, to remind himself and us that somewhere inside he was still a man who could make music. They had stolen the violin. But not the song. That is meaning. That is defiance. That is what it means to be human. So I ask you now, what is the song they couldn't steal from you? What inner voice have you silenced in order to fit in, to be safe, to be acceptable? Because I promise you this, your meaning lies there. In what remains when all else is stripped away. In the word you've never said, but ache to speak. In the dream you abandoned, but still visit in secret. In the ache that never leaves, not because it is a wound, but because it is a call. That call is not random. It is the echo of your responsibility. Yes, responsibility, not in the moralistic sense. Not shame, not duty imposed by others, but existential responsibility. The awareness that your life is your answer to the question of being alive. Logotherapy is built on this, that we are not driven by pleasure, nor by the will to meaning. And meaning is not something you consume. It is something you offer, something you serve, something you rise toward. That is the source of real self-esteem. Not self-love affirmations in the mirror, but the deep, unshakable sense that your life is meaningful because you are contributing to something beyond yourself. A cause, a person, a principle, a future you may never live to see. And in that contribution, you become whole, not perfect, not invulnerable, but integrated, real, alive. Some people wait their entire lives to feel whole. They chase it in relationships, careers, status. But wholeness is not found in accumulation. It is found in alignment. When your actions reflect your values, when your choices speak your truth, when your pain has been given a task, then you walk differently. You stand straighter, not because life has gotten easier, but because you have gotten clearer. You know why you are here, even if no one else sees it. Even if it doesn't make sense to the world, because it makes sense to your soul. I have seen this many times. The woman who chose not to remarry after her husband's death, because their love still asked her to carry his legacy. The man who, after losing both legs, became a counselor for veterans and told them, "We still walk, just differently now." The young boy who, after losing his father, planted trees in his memory and whispered, "You, who have carried a pain too long. You, who have doubted your worth, your direction, your place. Let me ask you this. If your suffering had a voice, what would it ask of you? To forgive? To speak your truth? To stop running? To create? To care? To change? Because I assure you, Your suffering is not random. It is part of your story, and your story, if you let it, can become sacred. Not because it is free from wounds, but because it reveals what you value most. And what you value reveals who you are. Not who you pretend to be, not who they told you to be, but who you were always becoming. This, too, is the path of logotherapy, to discover not just, what do I want from life, but what does life want from me? Not, how do I get what I need, but how do I respond to what I have been given? That shift is everything, because life will never answer your questions with clarity, but it will respond to your courage with purpose. It will not erase your past, but it will infuse your pain with direction, and you will not forget what you have endured. But you will learn to carry it differently, not as a weight, but as a torch, something that lights the way, not just for you, but for others. Because here is the final secret of meaning. It is not only found in personal growth, it is found in service. When you give your suffering away, not in bitterness, but in wisdom, when you let it become someone else's roadmap, when you allow your wounds to speak, not as cries, but as counsel, then you are not just healing, you are guiding. You are guiding. You are turning your pain into purpose, your sorrow into soil, your scars into signs. And that is how we rise. That is how we begin again. There was a night I will never forget. The wind tore through the camp like a blade. We were lined up, barefoot, half naked, skin stretched over bone. A man next to me collapsed. A boy, really, no older than 20. The guard kicked him. He did not move. He had let go, not just of life, but of meaning. And I remember thinking, this is where it happens. This is where the soul must decide, not whether to survive, but whether to be more than a body, to be more than a statistic, more than a reaction, more than a hollow echo of pain. And so I asked myself, again and again, what does this suffering require of me? Not how do I escape it, not how do I numb it, but what does it ask me to become? You may not be in a prison camp, but you have your own nights of bitter wind, your own invisible fences, your own places where the light seems to vanish. In those moments, the question remains the same. What is this pain calling you to do with your life? Because suffering is not simply a wound. It is a summons. A calling to responsibility, to presence, to transformation. But to hear that call, you must first silence the noise, the distraction, the endless consumption and performance and pretending that keeps you safe but dead inside. You must become still enough to listen. Still enough to feel the longing that has lived inside you all along, the longing to matter, to serve something greater than survival, to offer your life, not just as a sequence of events, but as a meaningful response to the questions only you can answer. And yes, that means stepping into discomfort, into grief, into the reality of what has been lost, but also into the possibility of what remains. Because the truth is this, you were not born to avoid suffering. You were born to redeem it. You were born to walk into the fire, not to be consumed, but to emerge clearer, cleaner, more true. You were born to rise not above your pain, but through it. And every time you choose to respond with integrity, every time you choose truth over convenience, courage over comfort, service over safety, you reclaim another piece of yourself, another fragment of your dignity, another flicker of your humanity, another note of your forgotten song. Let me be clear. This path is not easy. It will not promise relief, but it will promise meaning. And meaning, when found, makes all things bearable. I remember one man who found meaning in caring for a stranger weaker than himself. He would share his bread, hold him upright in line, whisper prayers into his ear as the guards marched by. He did not survive, but he died with purpose in his eyes. Another man endured because he had a manuscript. His life's work, burned in the chaos of war. He carried it in his mind. He rewrote it silently, page by page, as he shoveled snow. Every night he would close his eyes and reconstruct another line. This was his meaning, He survived, not because he was stronger, but because he had something to live for, and I too had something. The memory of my wife, the dream of returning to my work, the knowing that somehow this suffering could become testimony, could become teaching, could become seed. And so I chose, again and again, not just to survive, but to mean something. This is what I urge of you. Not just to live, but to mean. To take your pain and turn it into presence. To take your scars and let them become a language of love. To take your failures and shape them into a path for others. You may ask, but how? Where do I begin? Begin by listening to what breaks your heart, to what fills your eyes with tears, to what angers you, not in hatred, but in longing, to what brings you stillness, clarity, awe. That is where your meaning lies. Then take responsibility for it, not in shame, not in guilt, but in reverence. You are responsible for your life, not because you caused all your suffering, but because you are the only one who can redeem it. You are the only one who can turn it into something more than pain. And the world needs you to do this, because we are starving, not for entertainment, not for more consumption, but for depth. For people who have suffered and stayed human. For people who have cried and still chosen love. For people who have broken and returned as healers. You can be that person. You already are. If you're listening, if something inside you is waking up, it's because the meaning you've been waiting for is waiting for you. Not in the future, not in another life, but now. In this moment, in this breath, in this pain, you are being invited to respond. Not perfectly, but honestly. Not with answers, but with presence. And that presence will guide you back to your truth, back to your values, back to the deep and difficult joy that only comes when your life is aligned with your soul. Because this is joy, not comfort, not pleasure, but the joy that rises when you know, I am living for something worthy of my suffering. I cannot promise you that you will never suffer again. I can only promise you this. If you commit to meaning, your suffering will not be wasted. It will become the root of your wisdom, the fire of your compassion, the source of your voice. You will become a force, not by dominating, but by illuminating. And your smile, yes, the one they could never take, will no longer be hidden. It will return, not out of pretense, but out of truth, because you will know, deep within, my life matters. Not because it is easy, but because it is meaningful, and that is more powerful than any comfort this world can offer. So now, I ask you to pause, not to run, not to scroll, not to distract, but to listen. Listen to what your suffering has been asking of you. Listen to what your soul is whispering beneath the noise. And then answer, not with theory, with action, with presence, with truth. Because in doing so, you will not only heal, you will become who you were always meant to be. And that is the beginning of everything. They took everything from me. My home, my name, my freedom, even the ones I loved most, but they could never take my smile. Not the one I held on to, not out of joy, but defiance. You might think a smile is a small thing, fragile, easy to lose in the shadow of suffering. But let me tell you, when the world strips you of everything else, a smile can become a shield, a quiet rebellion, a final whisper of freedom. I'm not speaking of happiness. No, happiness is too fragile a thing. What I speak of is deeper, a reason, a meaning, a reason to rise each morning in a place where even the sun feared to shine. In the camp, people died every day, but many died before their hearts stopped beating. They lost their will, their purpose, and without that, the body soon follows. You're probably not living in a concentration camp, but perhaps you know the feeling. The slow erosion of self. The emptiness that creeps in when you no longer know why you wake up. When you smile only for others but never for yourself. When you laugh in the daylight but cry in the silence of night. Yes, I know. I've seen it in many forms. Some wear suits and carry titles, yet inside, they are collapsing. Others scroll endlessly through glowing screens, hoping the next post will distract them from the hollow inside. And some, perhaps you, carry a smile every day, but it is stitched from habit, not hope. So let me ask you something, not as a therapist, not even as a survivor, but as a fellow human being. When did you last feel like your life truly meant something? When did you last smile? Not for politeness, not for others, but because something in you recognized purpose. You see, I learned in the darkest place on earth that the human soul doesn't merely hunger for food or comfort. It hungers for meaning, and when that hunger is unmet, we suffer, even in comfort, even in safety. That is the quiet tragedy of our time. People have never been more connected, yet never felt more alone. They have more choices than ever, but no clarity on which path to take. They are surrounded by voices, but none that echo their truth. Meaning, that is what we are searching for, even when we do not realize it. In Auschwitz, there were no therapists, no books, no warmth. There was only the cold, the hunger, the cruelty, and the silent question that haunted each man's eyes. Why? Why keep walking when your feet are bleeding? Why keep breathing when your family is gone? Why keep living when death would be easier? I asked myself those questions many times. There were days when I watched the sun rise and felt nothing, when I felt like a ghost in a world of suffering. But then something stirred, a memory, a vision, a whisper. I remembered my wife. I could not see her face. She was somewhere beyond the fences, or perhaps already gone. But her image, her presence, lived inside me. She became my why. In that moment, standing in the bitter cold, shivering and beaten, I realized something that would shape the rest of my life. Man can endure almost anyhow, if he has a why. I didn't invent that idea. Nietzsche said it before me, but I lived it. I breathed it in my suffering. I saw it carved in the bones of men who refused to let go of their purpose. Some held on for a child, some for a piece of unfinished work, some just for the sake of bearing witness. That smile I mentioned, the one I refused to let them take, was not born from joy. It was born from meaning. I smiled because I could choose. They took my clothes, my name, my body, but they could not take my will. They could not dictate my inner stance. They could not force me to be less than human unless I let them. Do you understand the weight of that realization? That even when everything is taken from you, you still have the freedom to choose your attitude? That is the last of the human freedoms. And it is also the first key to discovering meaning in a seemingly meaningless world. You see, meaning is not something handed to you. It is not found in comfort or luxury. It is not found in achievement or applause. It is discovered in how you respond to life, especially when life does not go your way. Perhaps you've lost something, someone, a dream, a part of yourself. Maybe life has not unfolded the way you imagined, and now you walk through your days like a shadow of who you once were. Let me tell you, this is not the end. It may, in fact, be the beginning. Because when everything crumbles, what remains is your essence, and from that place you can begin again. Not with fake smiles or hollow affirmations, but with a deep, burning clarity that no one can take from you. I remember watching a fellow prisoner collapse in the snow. No one helped. To stop was to risk your own life. I looked into his eyes. They were still open, but he was already gone. Not dead. Just hollow. Defeated. He had given up on his why. Dust. It was then I made a vow, not to survive at all costs, but to never abandon my meaning. Even if it meant death, even if I perished, I wanted to perish human, with dignity, with purpose. This was the birth of logotherapy, though I didn't yet call it that. The therapy of meaning. It's not about analyzing your past endlessly. It's about awakening to your future, to what still calls you, to what remains possible. No matter the pain, you are not merely a product of what has happened to you. You are the author of what happens next. And your smile, yes, even the one you hide, carries more truth than you realize. It may be your silent protest against despair. It may be your soul whispering, I am still here. It may be your first step back to life. So I ask you, what is your suffering point to? What is it trying to teach you? What hidden meaning waits within it? Because I promise you this, there is no situation, no suffering, no tragedy so great that it cannot reveal something meaningful. If you are willing to look. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is why you are still here. Not to escape pain, not to chase pleasure, but to discover the meaning that lies beneath both. That is where we begin. Not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with courage. Not with smiles of convenience, but with the one smile that rises despite everything and whispers, I have a reason. People often ask me, how did you survive? But survival was never the goal. Meaning was. Survival by itself is animal, instinctual, mechanical. But to survive with your soul intact, that is human. That is sacred. There were men in the camp who had strength, food, even privileges, but they died inside long before their bodies failed. And there were others, thin as shadows, beaten and nameless, who still walked with light in their eyes. Why? Because they believed in something beyond the barbed wire, beyond themselves. Meaning is what separates us from despair. It is the compass that does not rely on external direction. Even when the map is burned, the compass remains within. You may not live in a world of forced labor or starvation, but perhaps you are imprisoned in other ways. By expectations, by guilt, by a life that looks successful on the outside but feels empty within. This is the silent epidemic of our time. Comfort without fulfillment. We chase distraction instead of direction. Pleasure instead of purpose. And so we become numb. Not because life is meaningless, but because we've stopped asking what it means. And the smile? That smile you hide? It might be the last remaining signal of your inner world, flickering like a candle in a room growing darker. That smile might be saying, please, someone, see me, hear me. Ask me why I'm still pretending. Let me ask you now, honestly, vulnerably. What is the pain you've been carrying in silence? What is the grief you've buried beneath routines and roles? What is the question that wakes you in the night, but you push away by morning? There's something sacred in that silence. Something the world cannot give or take. In the camps, there was no space for emotion. If you wept openly, you risked punishment or death. And so our grief found other ways to breathe. In the way a man folded his coat as if he were still at home. In the way someone whispered the name of a lost child before falling asleep. In the way I closed my eyes and imagined standing before my students again, speaking of hope. Those tiny acts, silent, invisible, even foolish, were in fact declarations of meaning. And they saved lives. They saved my life. There was a moment I remember vividly. We had been marching for hours in the snow. Our feet bleeding, stomachs aching from hunger. The guards yelled, the wind howled. Every sound was agony. And then, someone looked up. Above us, the sky had turned crimson, gold, and violet. A sunset so breathtaking it felt like a hallucination. For one moment, the entire group slowed. No one spoke. Even the guards fell silent. In that frozen instant, we were not prisoners. We were witnesses. Witnesses to beauty, to something untouched by war, hatred. It was in that moment that I understood. Even in suffering, life offers glimpses of meaning. Not in spite of the pain, but sometimes through it. I could have ignored that sky, kept walking, but instead, I received it. And that made all the difference. Now let me ask you, when was the last time you paused long enough to receive the meaning hidden in your life? We rush from one task to another, one obligation to the next, forgetting that meaning often speaks in whispers, not shouts. It hides in the ordinary, in a child's laughter, in a kind word from a stranger, in the ache of longing that reminds us we are still capable of love. Logotherapy taught me this. We do not create meaning by force. We discover it by attention. And suffering, though we do not choose it, has a unique way of stripping away the inessential, revealing the heart of what matters. I watched men share crumbs of bread when they themselves were starving. I saw a prisoner give away his last cigarette, not for favor, but because another needed hope more than he did. In a world where cruelty was the norm, even the smallest act of kindness became a revolution. And I ask you now, from the depths of that experience, what small act could you choose today that reclaims your humanity? Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic change, just a choice. To forgive, to stay present, to speak honestly. Stay present, to remember who you are beneath the masks. You may not be in chains, but many live in psychological cages. Perfectionism, comparison, shame, and yet the door to those cages is often unlocked. We just forget to try the handle. Meaning is not out there in the distance. It is here, now, in this moment. But to find it, you must ask yourself difficult questions. What suffering am I avoiding that might contain my purpose? What dream have I silenced that still breathes beneath my fear? What part of me have I abandoned just to be accepted? If you dare to ask these things, not with judgment, but with compassion, you may begin to feel the stirrings of something sacred. The smile you hide? Maybe it's time to stop hiding it. Maybe it's time to ask why it still exists, even after everything you've been through. Because if your soul still smiles, even secretly, it means you have not surrendered. It means there is still something within you that believes, that longs, that waits, and that, my friend, is the beginning of transformation. There is something curious that happens when a man is deprived of everything. You begin to see clearly, not the world as it pretends to be, but as it is. You see yourself, not through the eyes of vanity or success, but stripped, raw, and real. And in that mirror you must answer, who am I, when nothing is left to protect me from myself? In that place, truth is not poetic. It is brutal. I learned that we do not truly discover ourselves in comfort. We discover ourselves in confrontation, with pain, with loss, with silence. It is only when we are emptied that we become capable of receiving something new. Each morning in the camp, we were awakened by the cold slap of reality. The air was sharp, not with winter alone, but with the smell of death, the absence of hope, and the weight of dread. And yet, somehow, in that grayness, life continued. And so did choice. That's what they never understood. Those who tried to crush us. They believed that by taking our names, our hair, our dignity, they had erased us. But choice is beyond their reach. It lives in the one place no captor can enter, the soul. And within that soul, I asked the only question that mattered. What does this suffering demand of me? Not why is this happening, for that is a question of the intellect, and intellect cannot bear suffering. But what does this pain require? That is a question of the spirit. I remember a young man, I shall never forget him. He had lost everything, like all of us. But each evening he carved tiny birds out of pieces of wood, stolen from the barracks. He never spoke, but the birds, they sang. And in that act he declared, I am still human. No one gave him a reason. No one paid attention. But I did. I watched him, night after night. And I learned, when you cannot find meaning, you can create it. Even in silence. Especially in silence. There's a power in those small birds. A defiance, a beauty. He did not need an audience. He needed to know that some part of him still remembered how to create, how to shape, how to offer. What is the small act in your life that still whispers your name? What is the movement you continue to make, even when no one watches? Do not dismiss it. It is sacred. In the camps, people didn't die only because of beatings or starvation. They died when their inner world crumbled, when they lost the will to find meaning in what remained. One man survived because he had a manuscript he wanted to rewrite. Another, because he longed to see his wife again. Another, simply because he believed he must not die in vain. And I survived because I believed my pain must not end with me. It must speak. It must teach. It must serve. So I memorized the words I would one day write. I rehearsed lectures in my mind. I carried the future in the pocket of my soul, and it warmed me when my hands were too frozen to move. And you? What future do you carry quietly, Unsure if it's foolish to hope? Let me tell you, it is not foolish. It is human. Hope is not delusion. Hope is rebellion. Every time you envision a tomorrow in which your life matters, you are rebelling against despair. You are standing, like we once did, in the snow with your ribs exposed and your breath visible, and still saying, I am not done. Let me offer you something I wish someone had told me back then. You are not your suffering. You are what you do with your suffering. There is meaning in everything, not because the world is kind. It often isn't. But because the human spirit is capable of finding meaning even in a world that isn't. This is not wishful thinking. This is not optimism. This is the hardest kind of truth. You're responsible for what this pain will become inside you. Will it become bitterness, a weapon, a prison? Or will it become wisdom, compassion, a key? I saw men break from far less than others could endure. Why? Because their why was gone. And without a why, the how devours you. But those who had a reason, however small, could walk barefoot through hell and still offer someone a piece of their bread. One day, while unloading a wagon of frozen corpses, I looked at a face turned toward the sky. Ice had sealed his expression, and do you know what I thought? That man once held a child. He once laughed. He once laughed. He once laughed. And yet, this was his ending. And I asked myself, what right do I have to waste a moment? That night, I made a promise. To that man, to myself, to life. If I live, I will speak for those who cannot. If I live, I will never take a moment for granted. If I live, I will find meaning in every scar. Because scars are not signs of weakness. They are signs that something tried to destroy you and failed. And sometimes, we survive not because we are strong, but because our purpose pulls us forward. You may not yet know your purpose. That's okay. Purpose is not something you find like a lost object. It is something you uncover like a seed beneath winter snow. You water it by living, by noticing, by asking. So let me ask you now, what is life asking of you? Not what do you want? Not what make you feel good, but what is life demanding from your courage, your pain, your longing? In the camp, no one asked about dreams. Dreams were dangerous. They reminded you of freedom, but I kept mine alive anyway, in secret, in silence. And that secret became my strength. Now I ask you to do the same. Protect your dream, not with denial, but with sacred attention. Nurture it, because meaning is not loud. It whispers. And if you listen, you may hear it say, I'm still here. I've been waiting. Let's begin. In the darkness, even the faintest spark becomes a lighthouse. I remember the hunger most, not just of the stomach, but of the soul. My body ached, yes. My skin tore. My breath stung. But deeper than that, deeper than flesh and bone, was a hunger to be seen, to be remembered, to matter. It is the same hunger that I see today in the faces of people walking freely in the streets, heads bowed to their glowing screens, hearts heavy with invisible weight. They are not starving for food. They are starving for connection, for authenticity, for meaning. You, who are listening now, perhaps you too know that ache, not the one in your belly, but the one behind your ribs. The quiet question that rises at night when distractions fade. Does any of this truly matter? Do I matter? I wish I could tell you that this question disappears with time, but it does not. It evolves, it deepens, and eventually, if you're lucky, it becomes your teacher. Because meaning is not always given. It is forged, like iron in flame, like diamonds in pressure, like the human soul in suffering. In Auschwitz, I learned to see time differently. We did not measure it in days or weeks, but in acts of will. One moment of kindness could redeem an hour of cruelty. One moment of kindness could redeem an hour of cruelty. One decision to get up and walk, though the legs protested, became a declaration. I am still alive. I still choose. There is a story I carry with me always, One morning, a fellow prisoner woke up and refused to rise. He said, "There is no reason." "I'm done." We begged him. We reminded him of his family, of his music, of his laughter. But his eyes were hollow. He had fallen out of time. That evening, his name was on the list. He was taken. And I remember thinking, he did not die tonight. He died this morning, when he gave up his why. You must guard your why with your life, because one day it may be the only thing between you and despair. But where do we find it? That meaning, that reason? Here's what I discovered. Meaning is not universal. It is intimate. For one man, it may be his child. For another, it may be a song only he can hear. For me, it was my wife, and the image of a book unwritten, a truth yet to be told. And for you, only you can answer that. But let me help you search. Start not with what you've lost, but with what still stirs. What still brings tears to your eyes. What injustice makes your heart burn. What longing will not go quiet, no matter how many times you try to bury it. There in that ache is your clue. Because suffering often reveals what matters most. It burns away the unnecessary. It simplifies, clarifies, distills. In the camps, no one cared how many degrees you had, how many followers, how much wealth. What mattered was, would you share your bread? Would you speak gently to the dying? Would you give someone your last ounce of strength, not because they deserved it, but because they needed it? That was the measure of meaning. You see, the question is not, is there meaning in life? The question is, can I live as if my life carries meaning, even when the world says otherwise? Because when you live that way, something shifts. You stop surviving, and you begin transforming. Even pain begins to change color. It no longer feels like punishment. It becomes preparation. Preparation for what? That depends on you. Maybe your pain is preparing you to lead. Maybe it's preparing you to speak for those who cannot. Maybe it's carving space in you for a love you're not yet ready to hold. Maybe it's making you strong enough to bear the truth you were born to live. But it will never prepare you for anything if you keep running from it. We cannot outrun our suffering, but we can stand still. We can listen. We can ask it. What are you trying to show me? In Auschwitz, we did not have therapy. We had silence. We had snow. We had each other's breath rising like ghosts in the cold. But somehow, in that silence, meaning came. Not as a roar, but as a whisper. It whispered, "You still have the power to choose. You still have the capacity to love. You still have the capacity to love. You still have the freedom to forgive, even those who do not deserve it. And you still have time. And time, my friend, is sacred. You do not need years to live a meaningful life. You need one moment, one decision, to meet life with open eyes and an open heart. So I ask you now, what moment are you waiting for? What would it take for you to say, this is enough? I will begin from here. There is no perfect time, no ideal condition. Only the space between this breath and the next, and in that space, the chance to reclaim your soul. You may think, but what can I do? I'm just one person. I'm tired. I've been hurt. So were we. But even in that state, we still made meaning. One man would recite poetry at night, his voice trembling. Another would draw shapes in the dirt with his finger, remembering the feel of home. Another would stare at the stars and smile, as if the sky still belonged to him. And I would close my eyes and speak to my wife, imagining her eyes, her warmth, her hand in mine. Whether she was alive or gone, I did not know. But her memory gave me breath. Memory became prayer. Hope became rebellion. Meaning became my oxygen. And so I say to you now, find your oxygen. Not in what is easy, but in what is essential. Strip away the noise. Dare to be quiet. Dare to be real. Because in the stillness, you will remember who you are. Not your job. Not your roles. Not your wounds. But your essence. And your essence, though hidden, remembers its reason for being. You do not have to see the whole path. You only have to say yes to this next step. Yes to healing. Yes to meaning. Yes to meaning. Yes to life. Not because it is perfect, but because it still asks for you. There is something sacred in choosing to go on, especially when nothing outside you gives you reason. I have watched many souls break, not because they were weak, but because no one ever told them their suffering mattered, that it could mean something. So let me be that voice for you now. Your pain is not pointless. Your story is not over. And your smile, yes, even the one you fake, is still a bridge to the truth inside you. The smile we hide is often the deepest signal we're still alive, still hoping, still refusing to let go of the part of us that remembers joy, even when joy seems far. When I first saw men smile in the camps, I didn't understand it. What was there to smile about? But then I saw it was not a smile of delusion. It was not a smile of delusion. It was a smile of defiance, of dignity, of spiritual rebellion. It was the soul's way of saying, you may crush my body, but you cannot own my spirit. And isn't that the ultimate act of freedom? To choose hope in a hopeless place, to love even when unloved, to remain kind in the face of cruelty. This is not weakness, it is the highest strength. And this is what I discovered. Meaning is not found in avoiding suffering. It is found in how we meet it, how we respond, how we transform it into something that serves. There were men who shared their last crumbs with others, women who whispered lullabies to children not their own, eyes that still searched for beauty in gray skies and frozen fields. And when I saw those things, I realized, even here, especially here, life still asked for us. And now life is asking you. You do not need to suffer as I did to understand what I'm saying. You only need to stop running from your ache and start listening to it. Ask it, what is the wound I have not yet blessed? What is the part of me that longs to be seen, not hidden? Sometimes our suffering grows because we keep it underground. We pretend, we smile for others, we carry the weight silently. But meaning cannot grow in pretense, it grows in truth. So dare to be honest, admit what hurts, speak what haunts you, name what you've lost, not to drown in it but to transform it. Because everything named can be faced, and everything faced can be carried, and everything carried with purpose can become sacred. Yes, even your darkest moments, you may think, but how could anything good come from this pain? I asked the same. When I stood at the edge of life and looked down at the bodies of those who didn't make it, when I closed my eyes and remembered the warmth of my wife's hand, not knowing if I would ever feel it again. In those moments, there was no peace, only ache. But in that ache, I made a vow. If I survive this, I will turn my pain into something useful. I will not let it go to waste. That vow became logotherapy. That vow became the reason I wrote. That vow became the force that still moves through these words now, reaching you wherever you are. So I ask you again, what vow will you make? Not when things are better, not when the pain goes away, but now, inside the ache. Because meaning is not something we wait for, it is something we choose. Right here, right now, in the middle of your confusion, in the silence between tears, in the smile you're not even sure you believe anymore. That smile matters, because it means you're still trying. Because it means your soul remembers something worth living for. Even if you can't yet name it, you are not weak for feeling lost. You are not broken for not having all the answers. You are simply human, and being human means being unfinished. And that, my friend, is beautiful. Because it means you still get to choose who you become. Not who others told you to be. Not who others told you to be. Not who your pain tried to turn you into, but who you truly are underneath all of it. I have seen men remember their essence only in their final days. And I have seen people like you, who will awaken now, today, simply by asking, what does my life mean to me? Not to the world, not to my resume, to me. That question is a key. And if you dare to follow it, it will unlock places in your soul that no pain, no trauma, no cruelty can ever close again. You are not here by accident. The pain you've known, the beauty you've glimpsed, the questions you carry, they are the threads of a tapestry still being woven. And perhaps, just perhaps, you were meant to hear this now, at this moment in your life, because something in you is ready to turn toward meaning. So let me leave you with this for now, as we close the first act of our journey. You may have hidden your smile, but you have not lost it, and it still speaks. It still remembers. it still believes there's something worth rising for. Even if it is just the next breath, even if it is just one word, one gesture, one moment of truth, that is enough. Because that is where meaning begins. Not in perfection, but in presence. And that, my friends, where we will go next. Together. And if you are still listening, still breathing, still carrying that quiet ache in your chest, then I must tell you one more thing before we continue. You do not need a perfect life to live a meaningful one. In fact, it is often the shattered life that reveals the most precious truths. You do not need to fix everything. You only need to face it. Not with fear, but with the courage to feel. Because feelings, those painful, raw, inconvenient feelings, are not your enemy. They are your map, your teachers, your compass. When I was surrounded by death, by the howling winds of loss, by the constant taste of ash and iron, I felt everything. And for a time, I hated that. I wanted to be numb, to forget, to silence the ache. But I couldn't. And that is when I learned. The soul doesn't want escape. It wants expression. The very thing you try to avoid, your sadness, your grief, your rage, your doubt, may be the doorway to what you most need. Because meaning does not exist in theory. It lives in tension. In the very place where you are torn between what is and what could be. That tension is not failure. It is your invitation to grow. We live in a world that worships comfort and speed. That tells you to move on, to get over it, to smile for the camera, even as your heart is breaking. But healing does not happen in a rush. And meaning is not born from denial, it is born from struggle. From staying with the wound long enough to hear what it wants to say. And let me warn you, it will not flatter you. It will not give you simple answers. It may break you further before it builds you. But what it gives you is real. And what is real is what saves us. I remember one morning in the camp, a man woke up and said, "I dreamed of bread last night." That was all. Not gold, not freedom, not revenge. Bread. But the way he said it, with reverence, with longing, with the kind of hope that hurts, it stayed with me. Because even in a place of total deprivation, the human spirit remembered nourishment, not just for the body, but for the soul. And you, whether you are grieving or lost, or silently aching under the weight of your own expectations, are still that same spirit. You may not know what you need. You may not know where to begin. But you remember something, even if faintly. And that remembering is sacred. It means you are not numb, not fully. It means part of you is still alive, still watching, still waiting for the moment when you say, enough. I will no longer live as if life has no meaning. I will no longer pretend that comfort is purpose. I will no longer deny the voice inside me that still whispers, there is more. That is your turning point, and it must be chosen. No one will choose it for you. There is a freedom so deep that it terrifies us, because it places the responsibility of meaning in our hands. That is the freedom I speak of. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, not just to endure, but to transform, not just to survive, but to live meaningfully, even in suffering, especially in suffering, because suffering will come, whether we want it or not. The question is not, will I suffer? The question is, what will I do with it? You can curse it, you can deny it, or you can ask it what it came to teach you. That is the logotherapeutic path, not to ask, what do I want from life, but what is life asking from me? And if you sit with that question long enough, without trying to control the answer, something extraordinary happens. The silence becomes a conversation. The ache becomes a message. The chaos begins to form shape, and you begin to realize, maybe your life was never meaningless. Maybe you were just never taught how to see. Because meaning is not a luxury. It is not reserved for saints or scholars. It is a human necessity, as vital as air, as nourishing as bread, as foundational as love. And if you live without it, even in abundance, you will feel empty. But if you live with it, even in loss, you will feel alive. I have seen it. I have lived it. I have watched men with broken bodies carry shining souls, and I have met people with everything, and yet nothing inside. So I challenge you now as we close this first act. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions. Stop waiting to heal completely. Stop waiting to feel ready. Meaning does not come to those who wait. It comes to those who dare to seek it in the ashes of their own suffering, who dare to face the mirror and say, I am still here. I have lost much, but not everything. And if there is breath in my lungs, there must still be a task before me. So I ask you one final question before we move on. What is the task that only your suffering can prepare you for? Not the task of your job, your family, your social image. Your family, but the task of your soul. It is waiting. It has always been waiting. And perhaps the smile you've been hiding is not a lie. Perhaps it is the first light of dawn after a long night. The last flicker of hope before the fire returns. Do not put it out. Let it burn. Let it guide you. Let it remind you. You are still becoming, and meaning is still possible. Always, even here, even now, especially now.